honored to be here on this land, in this region, exploring some of the biggest questions of our time together. How did we get to where we are? What is the current state of our world in the 21st century? And how can we co-create a future most beneficial for all? And most importantly, what's next? What's the next chapter of our evolution in our human development? If you would travel across the universe through an ancient formation of our Earth of 4.6 billion years, from bacteria, fungi, plants, animals, we humans only enter the story. If you would imagine this as a walk of 4.6 miles, as the legacy of the Gaian scientist Stephen Harding reflects in the Deep Time Walk, then we humans would only enter this story in the last 20 centimeters. On the length of your arm, this would be your fingertip. More strikingly, the Industrial Revolution, which marks the last 150 to 250 years, would be 1/5 of a millimeter on this walk. And this is the time in which we've caused the amount of geological impact and mass destruction through human activity in the Anthropocene. We live in such turbulent times, socially, economically, ecologically, technologically, and also on a level of loss and meaning in our human societies. This presents us both with unprecedented challenges on a global scale, as well as unprecedented opportunity if we can transform them into a future that we're capable of and move to the next chapter of our evolution. Peter Drucker reflects that every few hundred years in history, there occurs a sharp transformation. Within a few short decades, society, its worldview, its basic values, its social and political structures, its arts, its key institutions rearranges itself. And we are currently living through such a time. The cultural historian Thomas Berry reflects that throughout the course of human history, we always had a story to make sense of the spirit of our time, to understand our present and navigate a collective sense of direction. The old story is dying, and the new story has not been born yet. And clearly we are in between the stories. From an anthropological perspective, this could be a rite of passage to move from puberty to adolescence, and that is a very challenging process. So what is the new story of our time? And what is the role of next generations in defining that story? And what is the story of the next generation? We live in times of transitions. Old paradigms do not respond to the emerging new reality. We need new ways of thinking, of learning, of leading, of designing organizations and communities, of collaborating and doing business, and ultimately new ways of being, seeing, and relating to each other, to our world and the earth. There's a very insightful description that says we need to shift from an ecosystem to an ecosystem, from competition to collaboration, from a chain of demand to a web of connections, from markets to networks, from the transactional to the transformational, from silos to synergy, from hierarchy to autonomy. And as Einstein has been quoted so often, we cannot solve our problems by the same level of thinking that created them. In understanding what these new ways could be, next generations can help us in defining that, not only from an inclusion perspective, but also from a perspective as collaborators and architects in the future prospects of our world. Meanwhile, we're living in the digital age, marked by exponential breakthroughs in artificial intelligence, with the rise of artificial general intelligence and artificial superintelligence, potentially scenarios for transhumanism, and in nano and biotechnology. And while we are advancing at such a tremendous rate and speed, it could be argued whether we are morally regressing. How can we ensure that the human aspect can be preserved in the digital age? How can we ensure that our digital technologies can aid emphasizing and enhancing evolving human intelligence alongside digital intelligence? How can we ensure that we also develop the social technology innovations alongside the digital innovations? And unlock our ingenuity and human potential through our human energy for human and planetary flourishing. Leading leadership theorists have already identified 15 years ago that we need a new leadership agenda to tackle these most pressing challenges of our time. Leadership development is one of the oldest fields of inquiry, starting from great thinkers like Plato and Aristoteles, and evolving all the way till the 21st century through various traits, styles, approaches, and characteristics. There are various experiments that look into what these new leadership paradigms can be, like authentic, servant, transformative leadership, ethics in leadership, and also experiments like TRU by Otto Scharmer, or Reinventing Organizations by Frederic Laloux, or the concept of holacracy and Peter Senge. Yet all these experiments and explorations in the current discourses are not responsive enough to what such a new leadership agenda requires, and there's not a converged enough debate happening yet. In my inquiry, I looked at whether new generations of leaders could be the carriers of the characteristics of new paradigms. And my inquiry has been informed by the following sources. I went to 32 countries across 6 continents and did global fieldwork through my liberal arts and sciences and sociological and anthropological background. I did participant observation and reflective journaling in the business community, in the scientific community, the indigenous, the artistic community, and the grassroots communities. I met 6,500 youth leaders in more than 140 countries by attending the youth leadership networks in which we self-organize ourselves globally. In these networks, I built a database that gave rise to building Synergize Earth Network, which is a global network of networks that brings the next generation of leaders together with existing leaders to tackle the most pressing challenges of our time. To shed social, scientific, and evidence-based light, I created a Ph.D. study in which I measured the worldviews, value orientations, leadership, and learning indicators of new generations of leaders, and gathered data in 117 countries, quantitative and qualitative data. My research insights revealed that as a globally oriented generation, as the first digital natives exposed to heightened mobility, advanced technologies, and hyperconnectivity, it is a purpose-driven generation that values and has a strong inclination for what I call values-based leadership. This means that they want to place their personal and talent development at the heart of their learning and align that with their professional development and skills, innovate, and make impact, whether that is within their families, their direct environments, the workplace, or society at large. This requires conducive conditions and learning environments in which they can cultivate such learning and development, and often our schooling systems and the workplaces do not cater and facilitate these conditions. And while millennials and Gen Z are more than half of the current world population of around 8.2 billion strong, they were also expected to comprise 75% of the global workforce in 2025. Since 2016, it has also been one of the top major CEO concerns because talent walks away within corporations and workplaces when their learning and leadership needs are not met. And since we live in a time of accelerated change, also the mental health crisis is something that millennial leaders are highly affected by, so they do value resilience. While we look at these questions and how the next generation can be drivers of global change, How can they be equipped with the values, the ethos, the worldviews, and the skill sets of the future to succeed in their need to be purposeful and thrive? How can they do this across generations? What drives them as a next generation of change agents and innovators? And how do they perceive this new emerging story of our time and their role in it? If we look at paradigm shifts, this is already happening in science from a mechanistic Newtonian worldview, highly compartmentalized, focused on specialization. We are shifting to more complex adaptive systems and lines of thinking that acknowledge interconnectedness and interdependence. Complexity science has been dealing with these tensions between these shifts, which is equally valid for leadership innovation in navigating planetary emergence in times of planetary emergency. The rapid advances in science, technology, and also our economy brought us far. But clearly, to tackle these most pressing challenges of our time, we need cultural change, which includes behavioral change. And we need to build the infrastructures and the ecosystems that facilitate such change. I have been surprised that such a pressing and great need is such a rare thing in our times. The noosphere can help us in understanding how such change can be facilitated, because there is a need for collective vision, story, and a shared framework of understanding to find a common denominator that can bring generations, disciplines, and sectors together. If you look back at the predicament and the scenarios of the Club of Rome in 1972, then the forecasts have been alarmingly accurate, and mass destruction through geological impact is expected to grow. The scientific field of big history and deep time, like the noosphere, can help us to understand how we can navigate these big questions of our time and also equip next generations of leaders in navigating a future that we're capable of, to find out what our role and place can be in the times that we're living and how we can transform these challenges into opportunities to move to the next phase of our evolution. Such a framework of understanding can help us to also understand how we can be protagonists and authors in our own story by taking ownership and partaking in the larger emerging story of our time. In my inquiry across the world at the nexus of theory and practice and science and society, it's still the deeper and profound understanding that perhaps the new story is not something that we can redefine from an anthropocentric perspective. Perhaps we need to create the conducive conditions in which the new story can emerge by reviving a sense of remembrance of what it means to be human and alive in our times. Perhaps then the new story can birth through us. And next generations cannot do this alone in taking up their role in this. And if generations before us don't fulfill their potential too, we need to work towards a world in which we can join our forces across generations, sectors, and disciplines to create these conducive conditions where next generations can work to discover their purpose and greatest potential, to innovate and make their impact, to work across generations and synergize and unite their forces, and take ownership over their own stories in partaking in the larger story. Because if these are the times and if we're the people, if it's not us, who then? If it's not now, when? Thank you.